Story 1. The Late Night Visitor. It was a Friday night, and I was looking forward to some quiet time at home. My roommates were all out of town for the weekend, leaving me alone in our suburban house. I didn't mind. I welcomed the peace and solitude after a long week of work. I had plans to binge-watch my favorite TV series and relax on the couch with some snacks. The first few hours were perfect. I had my blanket, the TV remote, and a large bowl of popcorn. I was halfway through a movie when I heard a soft, almost imperceptible knock on the front door. I paused the movie, holding my breath as I listened. Maybe it was just the wind or the house settling. I dismissed it and pressed play again. But then it came again, this time louder and more distinct. 3 deliberate knocks. My heart skipped a beat. It was nearly midnight, far too late for a casual visitor. I muted the TV and sat there in silence, my eyes fixed on the door. The knock came again, insistent and rhythmic. I tiptoed to the hallway, peering through the peephole, my breath caught in my throat. A man stood on the porch, his face partially obscured by the shadows. He was tall, with a hood pulled over his head, making it impossible to see his features clearly. He didn't move or call out, just stood there staring at the door. "Who is it?" I finally managed to ask, my voice shaking. There was no response. He just stood there, silent and still. My mind raced. Should I call the police? Should I open the door? My fingers hovered over my phone, but before I could dial, the man knocked again, 3 slow, deliberate taps. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I decided to wait it out. Maybe he would go away if I ignored him. I crept back to the living room, trying to calm my racing thoughts. But as I settled into the couch, I heard it again knocking, this time coming from the back door. I froze, the color draining from my face. I knew the back door was locked. We always kept it locked, especially when no one else was home. I slowly made my way to the kitchen, where the back door was located, every creak of the floorboards making me wince. When I reached the door, I peered through the small window. The backyard was cloaked in darkness, illuminated only by the faint glow of the porch light. But there was no one there. I held my breath, waiting, watching. And then, just as I was about to turn away, a face appeared right at the window. I screamed and stumbled back, nearly dropping my phone. The man was now standing on the back porch, his face pressed against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking. He was grinning, his smile too wide and too toothy, like a predator savoring the moment before the kill. "Let me in," he whispered, his voice muffled by the glass. I backed away, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I fumbled with my phone, managing to call 911. My hands shook as I explained the situation to the operator, my eyes never leaving the man on the porch. "We're sending someone immediately," the operator assured me. "Stay on the line and stay in a secure place." I nodded, though she couldn't see me, my gaze fixed on the man. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring at me through the glass, that eerie grin never leaving his face. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. Then, as suddenly as he had appeared, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the backyard. I let out a shaky breath, praying the police would arrive soon. I heard the faint wail of sirens in the distance, and relief washed over me. But before I could relax, I heard it again knocking, this time from the front door. I crept to the hallway and peered through the peephole. It was the same man, standing on the porch, looking straight at the door as if he knew I was watching. He raised his hand and knocked again, his eyes never leaving the peephole. "Let me in," He whispered again, his voice more insistent this time. The sirens grew louder, and the man finally glanced in their direction. For the first time, I saw a flicker of emotion cross his face, frustration, maybe even anger. He turned and fled down the steps, disappearing into the darkness, just as the police car pulled up to the house. The officers searched the property and the surrounding area, but found no trace of him. They took my statement and assured me they would patrol the neighborhood for the rest of the night. I thanked them, but the fear lingered even after they left. I stayed up for the rest of the night, every creak and groan of the house making me jump. I kept expecting to hear that knock again, to see that face at the window. But the rest of the night passed in tense silence. The next day, I found a note taped to the back door. It was written in messy and even letters that sent a chill down my spine. Next time, you won't see me coming. I moved out of that house a week later. To this day, the sound of knocking on a door makes my blood run cold. Because now, I always wonder who or what might be on the other side. Story 2. The Attic Stranger. It was a quiet evening in late autumn, and the wind outside howled through the trees. I was home alone for the weekend, my parents having left for a short trip. Our house was an old Victorian-style home with more rooms than we needed and an attic that we rarely used. It had been years since anyone had gone up there, mostly because it was filled with dusty old boxes and furniture from the previous owners. I settled in for the night, planning to enjoy the solitude. I made some tea, grabbed a book, and curled up on the couch. The house was eerily quiet, save for the occasional creak and groan of the old wood. I was used to these sounds and found them almost comforting until that night. As I was reading, I heard a noise from above, a faint thumping sound. I paused, listening intently. The thumping continued, rhythmic and deliberate, coming from the ceiling. My heart skipped a beat. It was coming from the attic. I told myself it was just the house settling, or perhaps a branch knocking against the roof. I tried to go back to my book, but the noise persisted. It wasn't the random creaking of wood. It sounded like footsteps, slow and heavy, moving across the attic floor. I put my book down and stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I tiptoed to the hallway, where the narrow staircase leading to the attic was located. The door to the attic stairs was closed, as it always was. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I knew I should ignore it, that I should just go back to the living room and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But curiosity got the better of me. I turned the knob and slowly opened the door. The wooden steps leading up to the attic were shrouded in darkness. I stood there listening. The footsteps had stopped. The silence was deafening. I grabbed the flashlight from the hall closet and shined it up the stairs. "Hello," I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. I took a deep breath and placed my foot on the first step. It creaked loudly, echoing up the staircase. I winced, waiting for a response, but there was nothing. I climbed the stairs slowly, the flashlight's beam slicing through the darkness. When I reached the top, I hesitated before pushing open the attic door. The attic was a sea of shadows, the beam of my flashlight barely illuminating the cluttered space. Old furniture, boxes, and forgotten relics were scattered around, covered in layers of dust and cobwebs. I swept the light around the room, my heart in my throat. And then I saw it. In the far corner of the attic, partially hidden behind an old wardrobe, was a figure. It stood motionless, its back turned to me. My breath caught in my throat. It looked like a person, but it was too still, too unnatural. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. "Who's there?" I finally managed to croak out. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, hunched and shrouded in shadow. My mind raced. Could it be a mannequin? An old piece of furniture? I had to know. I took a step forward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. "Answer me," I demanded, trying to muster some courage. Slowly, the figure began to turn, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being controlled by unseen strings. As it turned, the flashlight revealed its face, or rather, the lack of it. It was featureless, a smooth, pale surface where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. It was like a blank canvas, empty and hollow. I stumbled back, a scream caught in my throat. The figure stepped forward, its head tilting to one side as if studying me. I backed away, nearly tripping over an old trunk. My flashlight flickered, and for a moment, the room was plunged into darkness. When the light returned, the figure was gone. I bolted for the door, slamming it shut behind me as I raced down the stairs. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might burst out of my chest. I locked the attic door and ran to my room, locking the door as well. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mom's number, my hands trembling. She answered groggily, clearly half asleep. "Mom, there's someone in the attic," I blurted out, my voice shaking. "What? Are you sure?" she replied, now fully awake. "Yes," I insisted. It was. It was just standing there. She told me to calm down and call the police, and that she and my dad would come home immediately. I hung up and called 911, my voice quivering as I explained the situation. They assured me they would send someone right away. I sat on my bed, my eyes glued to the door, waiting for the sound of footsteps or the creak of the attic door. Minutes felt like hours. I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching, and finally the police arrived. They searched the house, going up into the attic with their flashlights drawn. When they came back down, they were empty-handed. "There's no one up there," the officer said, his tone calm. "But we did find something strange." He showed me an old trapdoor in the corner of the attic floor that led to a small crawl space. Inside, they found a few empty food cans, a blanket, and a small lantern. Someone had been living up there, hiding among the clutter. "We'll stay around the area tonight," the officer assured me. But whoever it was, they're gone now. I stayed with a friend for the rest of the weekend, unable to bear the thought of being alone in that house. When my parents returned, they installed new locks and secured the attic. But I never felt safe there again. To this day, I don't know who or what that figure was. Was it the person who had been living in the attic, wearing some sort of mask? Or was it something else, something not of this world? I moved out a year later, but the memory of that faceless figure still haunts me, especially when I hear the faintest creak in the night. Story 3. The Man in the Backyard. I had been living in my small house on the outskirts of town for about a year. It was a quiet neighborhood, bordered by a thick line of trees that gave way to a large, wooded area. My backyard faced these woods, offering a sense of peace and isolation that I enjoyed until the night everything changed. It was a crisp autumn evening, and I was home alone. I had just finished dinner and was in the kitchen, washing up when I heard a strange noise. It was faint, a soft rustling sound coming from the backyard. I paused, listening intently, but the sound stopped. I shrugged it off as a stray animal or the wind playing tricks and returned to my dishes. But then I heard it again. This time it was louder, like the sound of leaves crunching underfoot. My heart skipped a beat. I dried my hands and walked to the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. I hesitated for a moment before peeking through the curtain. The backyard was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the porch light. I scanned the area, my eyes sweeping across the lawn and the tree line. And then I saw it. A man was standing just beyond the edge of the trees, half hidden in the shadows. He was tall and gaunt, his clothes dark and tattered. He stood perfectly still, his face obscured by the darkness. I felt a chill run down my spine. He was just staring at the house. At me. I glanced out the window again. He was still there, unmoving, as if waiting for something. My mind raced. I decided to turn off the lights inside the house, hoping to make it harder for him to see me. I flicked off the kitchen lights, plunging the room into darkness. But as I did, I heard a soft tapping on the glass. I froze. My eyes darted to the sliding door. The man had moved. He was now standing right at the glass, his face inches from the door. My heart pounded in my chest. His face was ghastly pale, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce through the darkness. He raised a hand and tapped on the glass again, slowly, rhythmically, like he was playing a game. "Let me in," he whispered, his voice barely audible through the glass. It was hoarse, unnatural, like the voice of someone who hadn't spoken in years. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over a chair. My mind screamed at me to run, to do something, but fear had paralyzed me. He pressed his face against the glass, his eyes wide and unblinking, his lips curling into a twisted smile. "Let me in," he repeated, his voice a sickly sing-song that sent a wave of terror through me. I snapped out of my trance and grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. I backed away from the door, my eyes never leaving his. As I spoke to the dispatcher, I watched as the man slowly traced his finger down the glass, leaving a faint smudge. "The police are on their way," I stammered into the phone. "There's a man. He's trying to get into my house." The dispatcher assured me that help was on the way and told me to stay somewhere safe. I ran to the bathroom, locking the door behind me. I sat on the cold tile floor, my heart racing, listening for any sound outside. The tapping had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was almost worse. Minutes felt like hours. I heard the distant wail of sirens, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. I crept out of the bathroom, cautiously making my way to the front window. The police car pulled up to the house, and 2 officers got out, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I ran to the front door and flung it open, rushing out to meet them. "He's in the backyard," I yelled, pointing towards the rear of the house. The officers exchanged a quick glance and moved towards the backyard, their hands on their holsters. I stood on the porch, my body trembling as I waited. They circled the house, their flashlights sweeping across the lawn. But after a few minutes, they returned, shaking their heads. "There's no one there," one of the officers said, his voice calm but firm. "No," I insisted, panic rising in my chest. He was right there, tapping on the glass. "You have to believe me." "We believe you," the other officer said gently, "but there's no sign of anyone. We'll take a look around the property, just to be sure." They spent the next half hour searching the perimeter, the woods, and even the inside of my house. But they found nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing to indicate that anyone had been there. I felt like I was losing my mind. I knew what I had seen. I knew he had been there, right at the glass, staring at me with those hollow eyes. The officers took my statement and promised to patrol the area throughout the night. They advised me to keep my doors and windows locked and to call them if anything happened again. After they left, I sat in the living room, the silence pressing in around me. I kept the lights on and the curtains drawn, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. Hours passed, and gradually, exhaustion took over. I drifted off into a restless sleep on the couch. I woke up to the sound of tapping. My eyes flew open, my heart racing. The tapping was coming from the sliding glass door again. I sat up slowly, my body trembling. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned my head towards the door, and my blood ran cold. He was back. He stood at the glass, his face twisted into that same sickly smile. His eyes bore into mine as he raised a hand and tapped on the glass, his finger tracing a line down the pane. "Let me in," he whispered, his voice dripping with malice. I grabbed my phone and called 911 again, my voice barely a whisper as I explained that he was back. I stayed on the line, my eyes never leaving his as I waited for the police to return. The tapping continued, soft and deliberate, the sound echoing in my ears. The sirens approached, and this time, I watched as his smile faded. He backed away from the glass, disappearing into the shadows of the backyard just as the police arrived. They searched the woods, the neighborhood, but once again, he was gone without a trace. I moved out of that house the following week, unable to endure the constant fear. To this day, I don't know who he was or what he wanted. But sometimes when I'm alone, I hear that faint tapping in the back of my mind, and I wonder if he's still out there, waiting for the right moment to ask again. Let me in. Hey there, it's Mr. Night Horror. If you enjoyed this eerie journey and want to dive deeper into the shadows with us, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back with more spine-chilling tales tomorrow. Stay haunted.